Welcome back to episode 25 of Chambers Chatter. I'm Laura Chambers Babalis.
And I'm Shae Chambers Helms. Today we're introducing Rebecca Bruff to the show, author of Trouble the Water and her deep research and love for Robert Smalls.
And a special thank you to this month's sponsors, Chambers Helms Group and Soiree Social Media. I would love to start with what brought you to Beaufort.
I love telling that story. So, oh gosh, a long time ago now, 2013, my husband and I were living and working in Dallas, and we hadn't been married very long. We were kind of second round newlyweds, and his youngest graduated at Chapel Hill that spring, and at the very last minute, we said, let's go to the Lowcountry. Okay. So we did the graduation trip to Chapel Hill. We came to Beaufort. We took a tour. I heard a tiny little snippet of the story of Robert Smalls. And a couple of days later, we went back to Dallas. And that story just got under my skin. And for 3 years, I read things and I Googled things and it percolated. And one day I said to Tom, I think I want to try to write this story.
Ooh, I got goosebumps.
And he said, that's a great idea. And I thought his job was to say, that's crazy. But he was a champion. And so we planned what was going to be a sabbatical, a 4-month sabbatical, and came to Beaufort in 2017 and figured out right away that I couldn't write a book in 4 months.
Yeah.
And we love Beaufort. We love the Lowcountry. So we decided to make it home.
Oh my gosh.
That's how that happened.
I love that so much. How long did it take you to write the book?
So it percolated for those 3 years in Dallas. And then it only took about 10 months to really come up with a solid draft. I didn't know what I didn't know.
Yeah.
And any author now would tell me you can't do that in 10 months, but I didn't know that. And I wasn't doing anything else. I was just writing and researching and trying to soak up the whole story.
And was this your first book you had written?
It was my first novel.
Okay.
I'm a Methodist minister by training.
Okay.
And I had written a small little book for the denomination a few years before. But yeah, it was the first.
Wow. Okay. So you moved to Beaufort, do a 4-month sabbatical, and decide to live here.
And we're still here. I'm still here.
I love that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what about Robert Smalls do you think it was that got under your skin that started this whole trajectory?
Yeah, so I share this with people a lot because it really is the engine behind being here. So 2 things. So when we took that tour, I'm sure y'all have done some of the tours here. So one of the first stops was in front of that bust at the Tabernacle Church.
Yep.
The first time I'd ever heard his name. And then that historical plaque just has the basics, when he was born and that he'd commandeered this boat and liberated himself and 15 other people, that he'd been a congressman. And my first response to that was, that's an amazing story. Why haven't we heard it? Like, why don't we know that story? And my husband had always been a huge history buff. And I looked at him and said, you've never told me this part. And he said, I didn't know.
Wow.
Oh, wow. And so the curiosity about the man and his story was huge, but the curiosity about why we didn't know the story was right there as well. And so I really wanted to dig into both of those things.
Okay.
I tell people Robert Smalls really taught me American history. It was in the research that I found out so much that I didn't know, including why we didn't know about him.
Yeah, and why didn't you know about him? What did you come to find?
Well, so to what could be a whole dissertation, I guess, in a couple of sentences. He was such an extraordinary leader, 5-term congressman. But that last term in Congress was the year that Reconstruction was dismantled, and the black codes came in hard, and then Jim Crow. And by the time he died in 1915, the dominant culture was telling the stories that they wanted told and really silencing other stories. So when he died, the family record, there's some really good biographies, but the family record describes it as the largest funeral in Beaufort, but it wasn't even covered by the newspaper.
Oh my God.
Because it was,
wow.
we were in that place in terms of racism. Right. That's why we don't know a lot of the stories.
Right. So where did you go about finding most of your research for this?
Oh gosh. So the day we took the tour, I got off the tour and went straight over to Macintosh Bookstore. There are a couple of really good biographies. So I started there. I did a lot of just online searching, which, some of it's reliable, some of it just invited more questions, but that was helpful as well. And then when we came to Beaufort, took all the tours, talked to every librarian, walked all over the place, went to Charleston and did the same thing. And then I had the really incredible good fortune of meeting his great-great-grandson early on in that process. When I first met him, he was speaking about Smalls, and I didn't want to tell him that I was working on a book about his great-great-grandfather. I was very intimidated, but I finally sort of confessed it, and he was really helpful. And I had made a decision. I had decided to write it as historical fiction, in part to weave all the sort of historical context, the things that I think make a story,
Right.
As opposed to a history book. So I wanted to do that, but I'd also decided that I didn't want to ask the family to share stories that weren't already public domain. I think, families have stories that are their stories and things that they treasure. But as we got to know each other, and when I would hear him speak occasionally, he would kind of answer some of my questions that I hadn't asked him. For example, I really wanted to know why the man's last name was Smalls. His mother's last name was Polite. The family that owned him and his mother's last name was McKee. So where did Smalls come from? And in one of Michael's conversations when he was presenting to a group of historians, he said, we've never known why his last name was Smalls, but we think that it might have been because he wasn't very big. He was robust, but he wasn't really tall. And I had kind of guessed at that, but so.
It's so fascinating.
Yeah.
And I guess before we even go any further, because like you, who had never heard of him before, we should probably do a quick, who is Robert Smalls?
Okay, that's a good idea.
Before we keep going.
That's a good idea. And did you all grow up here?
We did.
So you grew up with the story.
Yes.
So you know the story. Okay, well, see, lucky you.
I'm probably about to learn a lot, though.
Yeah. So Smalls was born enslaved here in Beaufort in 1839.
Yeah.
When he was 12 or 13, the owner sent him to Charleston, where he was probably a lamplighter, according to one of the biographies. He worked in the restaurant of the Planters Hotel, and then he worked on the wharfs. And so he was working on and around ships when the Civil War began in 1861. And the cotton steamer that he was working on became a Confederate gunboat. And so then he was enslaved on this boat that was keeping him enslaved.
Wow.
And the next year, in the dark of night, when the Confederate officers left the boat against orders, he very quietly commandeered it and picked up his own family, the crew members and their families, and off they went, which is a story in itself.
Yeah.
But when the war was over, and he worked really bravely for the Union Navy after that. But when the war was over, he came back to Beaufort. He bought the McKee's house for back taxes, one of the many that had been evacuated. He became a local leader and legislator, and then 5 terms in Congress.
So crazy.
Yeah, so an amazing story, just one of the great untold or undertold stories in American history. And he's, along with all that, he's credited with delivering the first legislation that made free, compulsory public education a reality, not just in South Carolina, but in the whole country.
Wow.
So father of education, my first degree was in education, never heard the name.
That is so sad.
Yeah. So people need to know about him.
It's so
an extraordinary
amazing.
Story.
The stories that are written and some that are not. Yeah.
And it makes me think about how many stories are never told. How many stories go untold? And, I wish I had asked my grandparents more of their stories.
Right.
I think, I lived in Dallas, and a lot of our streets are named after people that did things. I've seen the names forever. I don't know their stories.
Right. Sure. Right.
So there are lots and lots of untold stories.
How long was he enslaved for?
So from birth until he was 23 when he liberated himself.
23, and then he bought the house shortly after that?
Yeah, he was probably 25 when he came back and bought that house. But you know, his experience as an enslaved person, he was pretty much grown in terms of having to grow up by the time he was 13 or so.
Of course.
And he taught himself to read and write and all that, correct?
So there are a lot of variations on how he became literate.
Okay.
There's one variation in the book that I wrote that is feasible, possible. We don't know for sure. We do know that he said himself in one of the biographies that quotes some things when he testified in Congress after the war. He was never really confident of his own literacy.
Mm-hmm.
And as an adult, when he came back to Beaufort after the war, he hired a tutor nearly daily.
Wow.
Almost daily. But he didn't keep much of a written record. I never found any journals or anything like that. He was a great orator, and so the speeches that were recorded in the Congress were pretty remarkable. But there's not enough. We need more.
The book that you've written, you've said you've made it kind of a fictional, but based on
Historical fiction.
Okay. Okay.
What I know about myself is that I've learned history best through really good, well-researched historical fiction.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in a book that can, so back up. When I was in high school, the way we learned history was memorize the date and the name of the general and who got the territory.
Mm-hmm.
And I never understood like all the why behind that. So in this story, I wanted to understand, and I had to learn a lot. I wanted to understand those 400 years of slavery in the Americas, even before the Civil War. I wanted to understand all the economic factors that led up to it. I was really curious about the role of women, like what was it like? The McKees had a daughter the same age as Smalls. What was it like for her to grow up as the Civil War was unfolding? Mm-hmm. And the suffrage movement was still kind of on the horizon. So I wondered, you know, what it was like for women in the South. And as a theologian, I was really curious about the role of the faith traditions. And so I kind of wanted to dig around into that as well. So I wanted that big picture. And fiction, historical fiction, allows the following of the historical record, but also imagining the motivations or the circumstances that these people, you know, I don't have any direct quotes from the actual characters, so historical fiction allows them to have conversations.
Fascinating.
Yeah,
What
is
are
really fun.
a couple of your favorite parts of Robert Small's stories?
Oh gosh, there's some really good stuff. So here's one that's not in the book.
Okay.
So you and now whoever watches this, I guess, will know this part. I couldn't figure out how to put it in the book without it sort of hijacking the story just a little bit. So when Smalls was in Charleston, before he made this great escape, he was about 17 years old, and he met the woman who became his first wife. Her name was Hannah. And when they did escape, they already had a child at that point. She was the one who remembered to bring a white bed sheet for a surrender flag when they got over the Union blockade. She was an amazing woman.
Wow.
But what's not in the book is that when they met, he was 17 years old and she was 30.
Wow. Oh, that's fascinating.
That's the reaction everyone has.
That's fascinating.
It kind of helped me understand something about them that's really not in any historical record that I could find, and that is that they saw something in one another, a kind of a strength and a kind of partnership that was not just about themselves and their own family. Mm-hmm. When they surrendered that boat to the Union Navy, they had the opportunity to go north and stay safe. And instead, they came back to Beaufort because it was their community. And they were committed to their community, and they did that together.
That says a lot about their characters.
And I mean, they always kind of had a target on their back, but they made a decision to be those kind of people and come back and care for their community.
Now, you mentioned that was his first wife.
Right.
Okay, so once they came back to Beaufort.
They came back to Beaufort, they had, when they escaped to freedom, they had a little boy, an infant boy, and a little girl who was 2 or 3, I think, who Michael, the great-grandson that I mentioned, is his great-grandmother. He remembers her.
That's so cool.
And then when they came back to Beaufort, they had 2 other daughters. Their little boy died young, very young. So they never had any sons that lived into adulthood. So all the descendants now, the direct descendants, don't have the same last name. And then after Hannah died, after I think about 20 years of marriage, he met another woman named Annie, who was a teacher, and they spent the rest of his years together.
What do you think was his biggest tribute to Beaufort in coming back and helping with legislative and
Oh my
everything?
gosh, and there's so much, and I'm not a historian, so the historians could probably tell you more clearly. He was instrumental in kind of bringing the railroad commerce back, which was really critical after the war and kind of devastation and economic loss. He ran a printing company for a while. He was the port officer for some time. I think education is his greatest gift, locally and to the state and the country. He just believed so strongly in literacy and in the power of knowledge and reading and understanding.
That's amazing. So what would his connection have been with the Penn Center, or is there a connection?
There is.
Okay.
So the Penn Center started as the Penn School.
Right.
After the evacuation of Beaufort County, but before emancipation. So all the people that had been enslaved were free, but they weren't really free to go anywhere.
Right.
And that's when Laura Town and other teachers came in and started the Penn School. He contributed to that. He was vocal in support of it, and just deeply committed to the work that they were doing there. And there were other schools like that. The one where the community college is, the Mather School, right. I've always wondered what it would be like to research all these young women who came from the North to teach. Imagine being here in 1869 at 30 years of age and teaching. And
that would be, I mean, that would be
probably a little Wild West.
Yeah, your next book.
Yeah, in a way. I mean, kind of wild and dangerous and brave.
And for people that are watching, what is the Penn Center?
So the Penn Center is kind of the cultural center of the Gullah culture on St. Helena. It was a school until, I don't know, early 60s, I believe, maybe. And now it's on a large piece of property. There's a museum, some gathering buildings, some cottages. Martin Luther King drafted some of the part of the I Have a Dream speech. He would come to the Penn Center to kind of have respite during the Civil Rights Movement.
It's always so fascinating how much history truly is here in Beaufort when you start looking for it.
I had no idea.
I was going to ask.
I had no idea.
Did you know that Martin Luther King came here before you started all this research with your husband?
Clue.
Yeah.
And there was so much I didn't know. The deeper I got into the research, the more I was enchanted by it and intrigued by it and kind of angry that I hadn't learned it.
Yeah.
That it hadn't been taught. It hadn't been taught.
So it's so fascinating. Y'all were in Chapel Hill, which is not really a close drive. I mean, it's not like,
it was the longest drive.
What was it about the Lowcountry that you're like, I finally need to go there?
As I said, we were living and working in Dallas. Tom had done his MBA at Chapel Hill, so he really wanted me to see that. And we were celebrating his daughter's graduation. And some good friends from the church at that time had a house at Sunset Beach, which is right on the North Carolina-South Carolina line, and they had invited us to stay a day or two. So we kind of broke up the trip that way. And Tom had consulted in this part of the country long before I knew him, but he loved it. And he'd grown up on the water in Maryland. So he kind of wanted me to see just the sort of the landscape of all this. And he knew that I love Pat Conroy's work.
Yep.
And, and it was wonderful. We drove in and I was like, it really is. Conroy described what I'm seeing and smelling.
It's so true.
Yeah.
He really had a way with words. Yeah.
He really did. I grew up, my childhood until I was 14 was in Amarillo. I don't know if you've been in West Texas, but it's flat and brown. And then Dallas is not as brown, but it's not particularly picturesque. But I remember driving down, from Chapel Hill and through so many trees and things, and we came here. And I remember when we drove over the swing bridge, Tom says I squealed. I didn't squeal. But I know I said something like, people get to live here. People get to live in this place.
We really do take it for granted.
It's so beautiful.
It's so beautiful.
There's water and there's trees and there's birds and it's so much quieter and slower than a place like Dallas.
Yeah.
There is something truly that like speaks to your heart here.
It's
It like
magical.
speaks.
It
Yeah,
really
it
does.
really, yeah.
Yeah. it really
So
does.
any future works in the making?
Well, I like to think so. I know. We'll see. We'll see. I've got a project that that I hope is moving toward a messy first draft sometime in the next month or so. That's it's nonfiction. It's a collection of essays over some experiences of the last few years.
Oh,
And life roller coaster.
mm-hmm.
And then there's another historical story that I kind of want to dig around in and see what I can learn and find out.
Is it by chance local?
Part of it is.
Okay.
It'll take a lot of research. And,
Yeah. I
we'll
can't
see.
wait to hear if it
We'll
comes.
see. Yeah,
comes out.
yeah. I hope it will.
Okay, so
hope
if
it will.
people want to read the book you've written, would you mind showing it?
I don't
And
mind at all. I think it's
yes.
the most beautiful cover. It
Oh
shows the
my
camera.
Trouble
gosh.
the Water.
Right. Yeah, so it's called Trouble the Water.
That cover is beautiful.
Isn't it beautiful? So after the book came out, I had an email from a woman and she said, "I'm so happy to see my photograph on the cover of your book." I thought, oh gosh, like, is that okay?
Copyright, yeah.
And I called the publisher and I said, "Is that okay?" And he said, "Yes, that's how it works. We buy art for covers." But the photo was taken here in the Lowcountry, and that's why it's so perfect.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's
it
amazing.
absolutely captures it. The title comes from an old hymn, African American song called "Wade in the Water," and there's a chorus that says God's going to trouble the water, but it's a story that comes from the biblical Exodus story about God parting the water so that the enslaved people could move to freedom. And then there's another story in the New Testament about God stirring the water, and whoever is the invalid that's in the water first is healed. And so it's a really rich history of that culture and the pursuit of freedom for people everywhere. I listened to it a lot when I was writing.
Yeah, no, it's
Yeah.
so well thought through, and it sounds like
Yeah.
lots and lots of research. So such a so cool.
Where can people buy it? Amazon or?
You can do Amazon, but please support the local bookstores.
Of course,
and
if
we
you're
have
local.
a lot of
Yes.
great. Or at the Conroy Center.
Okay.
It's available there. And I should also say that the audio is gorgeous.
Okay.
A voice and stage actor from LA did the audio work on it, and he just nailed it. It's beautiful. So for people that like to listen, it's a win.
I can't wait to read it.
Yeah, I can't wait for you to.
Becky, thank you so much for your time today and
pleasure.
sharing how you got to Beaufort, how it captured your soul, and some of the people and history within it. So
Thank you
we're
for
so
letting
thankful.
me share it. I love
Yes.
this community. I love, the natural world, the landscape, the friends. It's a very special place.